Hey everybody, in today's video we're going to be talking about the Nissi 100mm filter holder for the Z-mount 14-24. For those of you that watched my first 14-24 video, you would have known that I spent a lot of time talking about the use of filters and my concern over using filters with that lens, because that to me was going to be the make or break. I love using the 14-30 because that works so well with filters. So it was so important to me that if I was going to move to the 14-24, that I would have to have a filter holder that would still allow me to use filters with the 14-24 as easily as I do with the 14-30. Now, just so that you guys are aware, Nissi has sent me this holder for me to use and for me to kind of talk to you guys about and do a review of. I would have bought one anyway because I've been a Nissi user for a long period of time. So just keep that in mind that the one unit that I'm using has been sent to me by Nissi. So let's have a look at some of the details. The holder itself actually comes in two parts. You first of all have this attachment ring. Now this attachment ring will fit onto your 14-24. The way that it attaches, it fits into the grooves on the front of your 14-24. And then once it's in those grooves, it will lock in place using this pin. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that if you over tighten this locking pin, which you don't need to lock it into place, all the pin will do is it will drop into the groove and it will lock itself in place. You don't have to over tighten this, but if you do, it will start to mark and leave indentations or scratches on the hood of your lens. It's not necessarily a problem with the holder, it's more just about me over tightening things, I think. So it doesn't have to be over tightened, or at least if you are using this holder, just be careful with how you do lock it in place and how you do tighten it, especially if you're concerned about scratching your hood of your lens. So once this ring is in place, you then attach the actual holder itself to that ring. So for the 14-24, there is a particular holder attachment, and it's different from the V6 holder or the V5 holder that you might have used in the past if you've used a Nissi holder previously. So you can see that the lock assembly and also the pin is now one single pin rather than being two different attachments. This twist dial allows you to either lock or unlock the pin release for the holder itself, and also the 14-24 holder will only have two slots. Now in theory you could unscrew that and put in a third slot, but the problem is that's then going to cause vignetting. So you can see that I've got my old V6 holder here that has three slots in, and I have used that in the past on my 14-30, but I very rarely use all three slots. I basically just only use two slots anyway. So these are the two parts of the holder. They're all metal construction and they're pretty well built. I've not found any problems with them so far. And I've taken it to a lot of different locations. I've got some really good use out of it in different environments. One thing that I will say is that because I'm left-handed, in all of my behind the scenes videos that I'm going to roll in kind of B-roll on this video as well, you'll see that my pin is on the left-hand side because I'm left-handed. And that basically means that some of the writing on the holder is upside down. But because it doesn't really matter which way the holder goes round, doesn't really bother me. I prefer to have the lock and the dial on the left rather than it being on the right hand side. So that's obviously just personal preference, but the holder can go any way round. That doesn't really matter, but it's just something to be aware of. Now, the biggest and most important thing for me about this holder was the fact that it's still 100mm. I know that there's 150mm holders. I know that there's 150mm filters and so on, but for a long time now, I've moved away from the 150mm holder of the F-mount 14-24. And when I moved to the 14-30, I moved to 100mm filters, and I kind of swore that I didn't really want to go back. To put it into perspective, this was my old Lee filters holder. And the old Lee filters holder is for the F-mount 14-24, and this is the SW150 that Lee filters make. And because it has to take those larger 150 filters, it's just much larger. It's significantly bigger, heavier. You have to carry those larger filters. Not only is the holder different, and obviously here we have a 100mm filter versus a 150mm filter, the size and weight of them is the key thing for me. I just want to have something that's smaller and lighter and less for me to carry. So I'm glad that I don't have to go back to 150mm filters. That was the most important thing for me. So the fact that we're now in a position where I can use a 14-24 2.8 and still use a 100mm holder with 100mm filters is incredible. That's something that I've wanted to do for a long period of time. And as I mentioned, I have been using my 14-30. And that's why I kind of got so accustomed to these 100mm filters that I didn't really want to stop using that 14-30, because if I did it mean that I had to stop using this set of filters? Did I have to go to a smaller set? So the fact that I can continue to use this is fantastic. From my findings kind of out in the field and using this and taking lots of different shots with it, there's not been any problems that have arisen with this holder so far. It all works really nicely. I've not found any internal reflections, but it obviously being winter here, I've not had massively bright sun shining into the filters or behind the camera and so on, but I've never had any problems with my V6 setup, so I wouldn't expect there to be any problems with this setup. I've not had any issues with vignetting or anything like that. It's worked perfectly fine for me. And if you have a Z-mount camera and you want to get a 14-24 2.8 and you know you're going to use it for landscape, you want to shoot filters, a 100mm filter holder makes complete sense. And this Nissi 100mm filter holder for the 14-24 is going to be the holder that I'm going to use along with my Nissi filters as well. Now, the only thing that this doesn't allow you to do is something that you can do on the V6 with the 14-30. So on the 14-30 with the V6, the 82mm attachment ring has a built-in dial that allows you to screw in a circular polarizer. So on the attachment ring of the 14-30, you can have a circular polarizer screwed in here, and then you have your 100mm square filters attached into this holder. So if you are wanting to use a polarizer and using square filters as well, that's where the V6 and a 14-30 would be a better choice. And this is going to be something that might bother some people, but it doesn't really bother me. I don't use polarizers. I've shot landscape photography for years, and I've used filters for years. I use neutral density graduated filters, and I also use neutral density filters like a 10 stop, a 15 stop, and so on. But I do not use polarizers. So the fact that this holder is 2 slots, one for my grad and one for my ND filter in the back, is perfect. I do not need a polarizer slot or a polarizing ring in the attachment holder. This might be quite controversial, or it might be against what you've heard from other landscape photographers, but I don't see any need to use a polarizer. Obviously, it does a particular job if you want to cut through reflections, but there's a couple of things with polarizers that not a lot of photographers like to talk about, or there's a lot of things that photographers don't understand, especially when it comes to uneven polarization. I'm spending a lot of my time shooting at 14mm. Using a circular polarizer or even a square polarizer at 14mm is often going to cause me uneven polarization. So I don't use polarizers. I don't use them for my landscape photography. I'm more than happy to just use a grad and an ND filter. So that's why this holder with 2 slots is perfect for me. But there are obviously going to be a lot of photographers out there who do want to use a polarizer, and this is not going to allow you to use a circular polarizer. You can use a square polarizer in it, and it'll obviously just slot in, but you can't use a circular polarizer in it like you can with a V6. So just be aware of that, but that's not a problem for me. I don't use a polarizer, and I don't think you need to use a polarizer on a 14-24 anyway, because of the wide angle effect on polarization and polarizers in general. If you are interested in the filters I use and why I use them and what types of shots I take using these filters, I'm going to be doing a second video about this filter holder where I just talk you through how I use my filters. You know, why do I choose the grad that I choose? Why do I use the ND that I choose, and so on, and using them with this filter, with the Z7 II and the 14-24. So I will show you kind of a landscape orientated video around that and look into some more in-depth shots and things as well. This is just a first look at the holder itself and also some of the shots that you can produce with this holder with the right filters. One of the things that I wanted to show you as well is some of the pictures that I've taken using this holder, using the Z7 II and the 14-24 2.8. I'll put all the settings in there and also put all the information about the filters in there as well, so you guys get an idea of what filters I've used, what setup I've used, and so on. So overall, I think this holder is the perfect holder for me because I always only ever used 2 slots and I don't need to use a polarizer and so on. And the big thing is it means that I can use my 14-24 2.8 with 100mm filters. So for me, it's the perfect holder. Obviously, in your own photography, you're going to know what you need to use, what filters you need to use, and so on. So everyone's going to be slightly different, but this is all I could have asked for. It's a 100mm filter holder. It has 2 slots. I don't need any more than that. And it's really small, lightweight, and works fantastically well. So I hope you found this quick first look at this holder useful. As I mentioned, I'll do a second video about how I shoot landscapes, why I shoot long exposures, and so on. So if you're interested in that, then keep an eye out for that. But thank you very much for watching. Thank you, Nissi, for sending me the holder. And yeah, it's going to be the holder that I'll use going forward because it does everything I want it to do. So thank you very much for watching. Goodbye.